I would like to reiterate that Peru recognizes the right to peaceful protest and remains firm and determined to bring order and provide security to all Peruvians when these violent groups use force, destroying critical infrastructure and endangering the safety and living conditions of the population. The Peruvian government has been emphatic in pointing out that it has not authorized violent repression against demonstrators in the protest. The government of Peru deeply regrets the loss of the irreplaceable lives of 59 of our citizens in the context of these demonstrations and the acts of violence occur in our country. The competent entities, with full freedom and constitutional autonomy, are conducting the investigation to clarify the truth and establish the applicable criminal responsibilities. Likewise, the government is accompanying the families of the victims and ensuring compensation for the tragic loss of their relatives. Furthermore, I can clearly express that the government is providing any support and documented material needed so that justice will take its course and establish responsibilities following due process of law in all cases. President Boluarte and the government are committed to the investigations that are being carried out by the competent authorities and their subsequent results, which will be respected accordingly. In addition, I would like to underscore that acting with total transparency, the current government extended an invitation to the Inter-American Commissions on Human Rights and the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights to visit Peru and become acquainted with the human rights situation in the country. In response to this invitation, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights conducted a visit between the 11th and the 13th of January, preceded by a preparatory technical mission that took place last December. For this part, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights of the UN visited the country on January 19 and 20. For the accomplishment of these visits, the Peruvian state provided all the facilities to meet with authorities, representatives of the civil society, and victims of the tragic events, as well as its full cooperation for them in order to carry out their activities. Mr. Chair, each of the more than 33 million Peruvians have human rights. We have the right to protest peacefully, the right to freedom of expression and opinion, as well as freedom of movement, the right to work, access to health and education, and to guarantee these rights, we first need to restore social peace through an open and comprehensive dialogue between all parties involved and leaving behind violence, which is not the appropriate means to achieve political objectives. It is the duty of the Peruvian state and its population to defend the democratic institutionality and reinforce it, guaranteeing respect for the human rights of all Peruvians and ensuring a democratic constitutional transition to the next elected authorities. The government of Peru believes that the solution to the current political situation is the advanced call for new general elections, and we do hope that the international community does support in this constitutional and democratic process. Finally, I wish to thank and recognize the valuable support of the Government of Canada and members of Parliament during President Boluarte's difficult transition period. It is extremely important that we protect democracy and the rule of law, united with friendly governments who share our common values and principles. The Peruvian people wants peace and prosperity and to build a better future for the country and its fellow citizens. I would greatly appreciate your continued support during this period of transition. Canada and Peru have forged a long-standing, solid, and friendly relationship, being strong partners and looking forward to continue working closely to strengthen democracy and the rule of law, not just in our countries, but throughout the region. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rodriguez. We will now turn to the members for questions. Mr. Hoback, you have the first slot for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Ambassador, and your colleagues for being here this morning to give us the latest update on what's going on in Peru. And I do appreciate the briefings you've given us over time. So this is a nice chance to get it all on the record officially. You talk about the constitutional process that was used to reestablish the interim leadership. Can you maybe describe how that functioned and how that operated?
Yes. The succession of we have the Articles 19 and 112 of the political constitution that establish a term of 5 years for the Congress and the presidency. This means that under ordinary circumstances, the members of Congress, as well as President Boluarte, would finish their current term in July 2026. As I mentioned before, there was a constitutional association where the former President Castillo tried to attempt to do a coup d'etat. Was an immediate reaction of all the democratic institutions. The Congress convened, and President Castillo was impeached with 103 votes, including all the political parties, including Perú Libre, who was the party that actually presented the candidacy of President Castillo. So after that, following strictly what the Constitution says, Vice President Boluarte was sworn in as the president of Peru. This is the constitutional procedure. But now the government is trying to hear what is the general demand of the population to have in advance a new general electoral process. So to do so, we need to have a constitutional reform. So that's why, taking into account this political crisis and the demands of the population, President Boluarte, in accordance with the provisions of Article 107 of the Political Constitution of Peru, submitted for urgent consideration of the Congress of the Republic a constitutional reform project that modifies the terms of her mandate, by which it proposed that the general elections be moved forward to April 2024. That bill was approved last December in a first vote with 93 votes. I must point out that prior to the presentation of this bill, there was another one presented within the Congress in which it was proposed to hold elections in December 2023, assuming the new government on May the 1st, 2024. That project was rejected. Subsequently, in January, they left aside the bill that was voted, presented by the executive branch, and the Congress, within the Congress, was presented two projects. Again, sought to bring forward elections to December 2023, which did not achieve the necessary consensus to be approved. For this reason, President Boluarte presented for the second time a new project to advance elections, this time to be held in October of this year, and having the new government to take office on December the 31st of this year. This project was referred to the Constitution Committee and was not approved. So currently, the Congress is still discussing the issue, and the legislative could be concluding by tomorrow, but there is some discussion between the parties at Congress to extend this legislative session until February 17 to continue talking about this. But this is still working out right now as we're talking.
It is the Congress that will decide. It's all members of Congress. It's not one individual saying this or that.
No,
correct?
it's the attribution of Congress according to the Constitution, because to call in advance a general electoral process, we need to reform the Constitution. And the only body that can do that is Congress.
So the individuals that are elected at this point in time, if there's a new election, will they be allowed to put their names forward again for the next term, or would they have termed out?
This is something that is being discussed within Congress, no? If they have the possibility of being reelected or not, because the Constitution does not recognize the possibility for Congress, for congresswoman, congressman to be reelected. Yeah. So, but in this case, because the mandate is not finishing because it's for 5 years, I don't know if they are going to be discussing that possibility. Okay. This is something that pertains to the Congress.
In the removal of the president, Congress and the Constitution was followed in the process to have him removed. Is that fair to say? Strictly,
yeah. It was a constitutional succession. There is no question about it. Yeah.
Okay. So as far as the military, the judicial branch, there's an agreement that the process was legitimate process.
Yeah. Actually, when President Castillo attempted to do this coup d'etat and made this message to the nation, after the message, the armed forces and the police emitted a communique saying that they are going to respect the Constitution.
So it did what it was supposed to do.
And exactly, it respect the Constitution, and all the democratic institutions answered to that attempt of President Castillo, and he was impeached, as I mentioned earlier, and then Vice President Boluarte was sworn in.
So when you look now at the protests that are going, do you see any outside influence from countries in the region trying to have an impact on, to disrupt the activities in Peru, or do you see it just domestic?
There is ongoing investigations, and I cannot tell you whether is that the case or not. But the reality, as I mentioned, we have been able as a government to differentiate three types of protesters. No, the ones that are peacefully expressing their demands, what they believe it is necessarily to do. Then the second group are the supporters of President Castillo, that the only political agenda they have is to have President Castillo liberated and to have a new constitution. And then these violent groups that I don't know. What I can tell you is I have here the information regarding a statement made by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, in which
Mr. Ambassador, I'm
Yes.
sorry, we're considerably over time. Can I ask that you conclude your remarks in about 20 seconds?
Oh, no, okay.
In response.
So I can go back on that. Yeah.
Thank you. So we next go to MP Zuberi.
Ambassador Rodriguez, I'd like to thank you for being here, and I've read your bio and see that you've been a diplomat for the last 20 years or so. Sorry, since 1990. So I recognize your service and your contribution to this committee. Can you please tell us what's the situation of the past president Castillo right now? What is his situation briefly? If you can just briefly touch upon that.
Yeah, of course. As I mentioned, President Castillo attempted a coup d'etat, so a criminal act typified in our criminal laws as a crime of rebellion was considered. So after giving a message to the nation where he declared the constitutional closing of Congress, the intervention of the whole judiciary, and he decided to rule by himself through decrees. So he was detained in flagrant crime by the Peruvian National Police and placed at the disposal of the corresponding judicial authorities. Given the seriousness of the act and the position Mr. Castillo held, the Peruvian Supreme Court of Justice ordered Mr. Castillo to be held in preventive detention for 18 months. This period of detention is being executed in strict respect of his fundamental rights. He's not in a common prison, he's in a special prison, and the former president has a legal defense, received daily visits. He has even been visited by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. He's not isolated and actively coordinates the management of his Twitter account, among other rights. The situation of former President Castillo is a matter of strict competence of the Public Prosecutor's Office and the judiciary, institutions that have been following his judicial case in a strict compliance with the rules of due process. And they work, I have to emphasize this, under the constitutional principle of separations of powers and are autonomous in their responsibilities and decisions in each specific case.
Thank you. That was a very thorough answer, and I